Clicking live. Okay, I think we are live. So I was just chatting with our new esteemed guest, Rainman, also known as Tim,
Hey,
and we're
Andrew.
having a pretty cool conversation about Friendtech of all things. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But firstly, a quick intro here. So welcome to the fourth, maybe it's fourth and a half, considering we had a bit of a snafu last Thursday where I had crazy construction going on due to a solar panel installation, unbeknownst to me. But that's okay. Stuff happens. It's live. And live streams. Live streams have that risk. So here we are again, episode 4 officially. And what we're going to try to do this episode is actually look at a Web 2 template, so a non-Web3 template. A really cool concept. Definitely want Tim to walk through his concept. But basic ideas is we're taking a publishing, template in the vein of something like Substack or even Medium, and we're going to add like a Web3 spin to it, right? And it's not necessarily going to be the headline feature, but again, this mantra of low-key Web3, it doesn't have to be, right? I think there's lots of ways Web3 can augment or add value to an existing application or set of features and things like that without it being front and center, and even in some cases, actually it being almost invisible to the user, right? So what we're going to do, firstly, Tim, welcome. Thanks for joining a second time and being a really good sport. I may release the other video. It's on private right now. I may release it at some point because it's just kind of funny as a blooper reel or something like that. But man, we were like trying to have a conversation and it was literally like jackhammers and stuff going on in the background. So anyway, Tim, welcome. And thanks so much for joining. Thanks for, being willing to share a bit of your concept and doing this build for the community so they can learn a little bit.
Cheers, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Looking forward to our second attempt.
Mm-hmm. Second time's a charm, maybe. So yeah, Tim, do you want to give a quick intro about yourself and definitely about your concept and how it kind of came about?
Hey guys, my name's Tim Rayner, in Discord Rainman. I've been in the crypto industry since 2015 onwards, 16. Took more of an in-depth dive in 2017, and I've been in and out the projects, some good, some bad, some very bad. But I've learned quite a lot about the technology and its understanding for over these years, and seen a lot of changes come and go. Specifically from ICOs, NFTs, launchpads, STOs, etc. I stumbled upon about a year, or one and a half years ago, onto the Nocode solutions provided by One Andrew, I'm trying to dabble about and see what can be done for future opportunities with myself and maybe other people.
Yeah.
So that's it in a nutshell.
That's awesome, man. You've been around. You're like an OG. You've been around through all the
I tend to stay out of the way,
Yeah, I mean,
crypto could be a good or bad thing.
Yeah.
I've worked with some amazing people, some of the most well-known people in the industry. Even before Binance's ICO, Decentraland, I was invested in these companies.
Yeah.
But I've been, with one or two platforms where, after I've left, the developers have not died, but the platform has died, or the developers rugged the product or something like that. So, it's crypto. You be very careful who you do work with, who you line yourself with. And it's best to just take a step back and refresh sometimes,
Yeah, no, for sure. So I think we're definitely fortunate in that regard where, in some ways, the folks that have gravitated towards the no-code solutions, more often than not, they actually come from outside of Web3. And it's folks that are Web3 curious, as I like to say, who have just an inkling that the functionality could be used for something unique, right? Something novel.
Yeah.
And I really like that. I mean, part of what gets me up in the morning is having conversations with folks like you and others who just have these awesome ideas. Like, we mentioned, I think in a couple of our last episodes, had a marketplace built specifically for digital tattoos. Inktrader.io, which just launched 3 weeks ago, continuing to ramp up. But yeah, like another idea that I just would never have thought of in a million years. But it totally makes sense. And I think that's the beauty of Web3 ultimately. I think from where we started and where you came from, I mean, again, like OG stuff like ICOs and all that, that needed to happen. That was a necessity. But I think we're finally at that point where we have this intersection of all these really cool technologies and tools and things like Nocode and like, things like Third Web and this infrastructure where now, you don't need to be like a Solidity developer to make this stuff happen. Right.
Correct.
And I think that's where we're going to get to this like Cambrian explosion, hopefully of ideas where, people hopefully start to realize like, man, okay, number one, I don't have to be a Solidity developer. Number two, I don't need to potentially hire a Solidity developer, which is its own obstacle of they're not cheap. Typically a full-time developer is probably like 6 digits easily, US dollars per year, right? And so I think again the whole our whole goal, my whole goal, and like Tim said, he's been on this for about a year and a half, so pretty much since the beginning. Whole goal for One to All and now for Web3 Nocode and NovaBlock and all the things coming together is to try to lower that barrier to innovation as much as possible, right? So you have an awesome idea, you think it could be, even more awesome with Web3, like why not try it? And I think Tim is a perfect example of this because like he said, he's approaching this more as like almost a thought experiment in some ways. Like I think through our conversations, you've mentioned a couple times, I think you're really tactical about it, which is really awesome, which means like, you're kind of like approaching it from the perspective of like, want to give us a try, want to see, what the potential demand is, and then kind of work from there. So more of an iterative approach, right?
Yeah. You did hit the nail on the head when you were talking about, us coming through different, over the years of going through things from ICOs and things. Yeah. And I remember back in the day, that's all we used to talk about was we needed to decentralize everything, decentralize this, that, and the other. How fast is the TPS of this blockchain, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But as successful as centralized exchanges like Binance and Coinbase are, they are technically the Web2 platforms integrating decentralized technology, smart contracts with heightened security. So it should have been, how can we implement this technology with the current Web2 technologies before we then transition into a more decentralized state? Right. And I think that's where we're sort of at now, that paradigm shift where it is sort of, the Web2 companies, as you've seen, Adidas, Nike, all these companies are jumping into it. Yeah. And it is the adoption of Web3 into it. It's like hybrid, as we said back then, Shopify and things like these are doing these plugins. But what you've got with the no-code, again, you picked up on the cost to even develop an MVP or a basic beta is you're talking 100, 200, 300,000, depends on the complexities of the smart contracts and the audits required. Yeah. But with no code, you can do that for less than 20, 50 grand, 50,000. It depends, again, complexities. Yeah. And then the rest of that budget can go towards marketing, which is in this industry, the highest part of your budget and everything that, is required because there's so much out there in the ocean,
Definitely. Yeah. So, I would actually say you could even reduce that by another order of magnitude, right? So, 2,000 to 5,000 if you want to bootstrap. And what we're trying to do here is offer some resources so people have the option to bootstrap, which is basically, build it yourself, right? And I actually have a couple of, So I actually you're, again, perfect example of that. But, I've actually a couple of folks that I've gotten to work with that are looking to, one, try to build something themselves. Sure, the budget side of it comes into play, but more so it's about actually like adding a new skill set, right? Like I think the thing that I've really come to appreciate over the past 2 years. So 2 years ago, I was a complete newbie to Bubble as well, and all the stuff, practically speaking, that we've built out and I've kind of learned has basically been organic, right? It's just been through messing around with stuff, trying to get stuff to work. Yeah. And I think, hopefully what we're doing is trying to accelerate that so the next person doesn't have to spend 2 years. But, what we're kind of talking through now, what we'll kind of walk through is actually a result of several years of experimentation and figuring stuff out, so that now the next wave of folks don't have to go through that. And I think because of that, it's even more of a viable solution for someone to get an MVP stood up, and not having to spend, again, 5 figures, 6 figures, etc. Types of solutions that have an open framework like Nocode and things like that, because I want to see like all the cool ideas that people can bring to the table, which again I am not going to be able to come up with myself, right? And so I think it's really fascinating to just like put the tools out there, hopefully put more of the resources out there, and then like kind of see what happens, like see what people build with it, right? Because I think that's the heart of like Web3 right there.
Well, with what you got with Novablock, one to all, the amount of plugins and the solutions that you have right now for people to do it themselves, similar to like a WordPress repository or plugin list, there's so much you can build with it, and the thing is, it's not super difficult. There could be persistence and a little bit of self-learning.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of things you can do very quickly. Yeah. Very, very quickly. And you've given the solution on there. There's one plugin that may not be able to do that certain thing, but this one that works in collaboration with allows you to do that. Yep. So it's like, okay, perfect. Let's get this done. So yeah, it's exciting, the road ahead.
I think that's a perfect segue. I think we have a couple people on, so welcome. And actually, if folks have any questions, I'm actually going to post a real quick note here. Any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll try to answer them live. But what we're going to do is actually we're kind of going to begin with the end in mind, right? And what we have here is the Publish template. So Tim is modest in that he's actually done a lot with this already. Number one, I think the branding and everything is all custom. So if you go to the homepage, I think that
it's private. I put it in private right now. That's just because I've got a couple of things that I need to identify before people start signing.
Oh yeah. So not literally go to the homepage, but let's if we kind of see how he set it up. There's really cool branding, which again is a benefit of using something like Nocode and Bubble, where it's what you see is what you get, right? Or WYSIWYG is what they call it. And so what we have here is a pretty cool template, which again, when it started was Web 2, really about generating text-based articles. Tim's also made some other enhancements where he brought in what was the plugin you used for actually the posting, like the text editor here?
You're asking me now.
Oh, I think we can look that up.
Me a second. Do you mean on when you're writing an article itself?
Yeah.
I think this one at the moment is the rich text editor from Bubble itself.
Oh, okay, the built-in one. Yeah.
The built-in one, but then I built a previous platform, as I said in the video we tried doing before, called Fast Mode AI, which integrated ChatGPT 4, and
cool.
It allowed for the collaboration with AI to further write the articles in a rich text editor. So it's the same as like Medium, Substack, all these type of platforms. They're all open source. You can get half of these anyway, and then customize them further. So yeah.
So yeah, totally. So that's cool. So this is basically using the built-in functionality here, and we're going to do a sample post here just to see how this is set up. Going to put in the cool publish logo. This is a sample post, which will become an NFT, and put a category here. There's some test buttons here, which we may step into. Actually, we will step into the workflows there. We're going to post this, and you'll see a couple things start to happen. Again, there's some test elements and code here. What's happening here is it's actually doing a couple things. So we're going to break this down, right? And what we might try to do if we have time is see if we can have a clean slate approach. We're going to create a duplicate, again, pending time. But what we'll definitely do is step through each of the workflows and concept and really kind of break them out. But what we actually just did, you saw a couple of the notifications come up top, and it's really three things that we did in sequence. So one is we this is a bit of a unique approach again, right? A novel thing where Tim's concept is to take the article and take the dynamic content that you're creating, and that's why, in the description of the video, we basically, this is actually generative minting, meaning the content of the NFT is dynamic. It's being created right in front of you. It also can actually be programmatically created. There's nothing preventing someone from building like cool workflows in Bubble to dynamically and programmatically create content. Could be images, text, etc.
Yeah.
In this case, it's going to be the text that the user's punching in. And what we're doing is step one, we're flattening that image. We're taking the elements in Bubble in the app, creating an image out of it. And then step two, taking that image, passing it to what is called IPFS, which is the interplanetary file, either file system or file storage. Effectively, that's kind of a decentralized, more or less permanent peer-to-peer file storage that most people in Web3 use. And then thirdly, we're getting the resulting, effectively URL or address of that now, posted content, the image, and then using that to mint the NFT, right?
Yeah.
And so that was actually happening as we, pushed the button. You saw the different little notifications come up, and then ultimately, what we have, sometimes the syncing, let's say on OpenSea, takes a little while. So I don't know if the image is going to pop up, but we did add a little button here, which is View NFT, just to kind of make the point. And here you can see, right? So the content in terms of the title, the description. And again, the image might take a little while, but let's double check. There's a way to actually check this directly. This is maybe a little bit of an OpenSea, best practice. At any time, you can actually see the metadata by going to details, clicking the token ID number, and then you can see the metadata. And here we have a link to the image, and we'll give that a second to load, but there it is. Yeah, so there you see, this is a great publishing platform. This is a sample post. That's literally what we just typed in. You see the format of it. It is, again, what you see is what you get. We're literally taking the elements as constructed by the app, pulling them and taking a snapshot. Behind the scenes, what's happening is it's using a function which is relatively new to HTML5 called HTML2 Canvas. But there's there's a really nice plugin, not one of our plugins, but that's totally okay. Free plugin called Element to Image Capture. Let's take a look at it, actually. I believe it's Element to Image Capture.
Just to reiterate, everything on this platform right now is a rough copy, just for a sort of an MVP.
Yeah.
These things can be expanded, redesigned, ventured further. Yep. So, but do you really care what a post looks like if if it's on the published platform or it's on Twitter or something like that and it's displayed on that platform perfectly? Fair enough. If you were removed from Twitter, you got banned or something like that, your posts were deleted.
Right.
It's still on the blockchain and pinned to IPFS. So therefore, you can still view it. And if compatible with other platforms offering the similar tech, you could still call that information to prove authenticity, proof of free speech, proof of authority, things like that.
Yeah.
So
totally, and that's great. Yeah, I mean, when we talked about this concept, again, it was one of those things. I don't come from the publishing space or anywhere near that, but when you mentioned it and you described the rationale for why it made sense to have some Web3 functionality supporting that, in terms of the permanence of it's kind of like the IP, right? The permanence of people's writing. Again, it made total sense.
There's a lot of discussion around these things with the IP, the ownership.
Yeah.
But the simplest form is freedom of speech.
Yeah.
But freedom of speech should come with if you say something that is bad, you are it's your responsibility to make sure you're saying the wrong thing, because the right thing. Because if you say the wrong thing or something illegal or insightful or something hatred or whatever, then you're also accountable for what you put online. So there's multiple factors when it comes to free speech, but this is one of the better forms I think you can go with.
Yep. I think that's really cool. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? It's
Yeah,
both an incentive and a bit of a, you know, a I don't know what the right term is, but a way to instill responsibility too in terms of what people are already
exactly.
generating,
Yeah,
right? So let's take a look at some of the workflows, right? Firstly, I was trying to find
yeah,
it. I think they renamed it recently, so it took me a little bit to find, little while to find. But element to image, and they recently added the ability to add a zip function too, or turn it into a zip file. But yeah, this is a really, really good plugin. Again, not one of ours, but when we find good stuff, we're totally happy
yeah.
to share it. Um, Works really well. The one thing you need to be careful when you use this plugin is it doesn't convert SVG images, and that's kind of, it makes sense if you are familiar with SVG. It's SVG is like almost like a programmatic image. It's like a vector-based image format, and so, but pretty much everything else,
But that's
PNGs.
something the platform owner can do then.
Yeah.
So you can do an action if image SVG, you can run a conversion, convert to JPEG or something like that, you know?
Yeah, totally.
There's other things you can do if you want to add your workflow
You know what?
count up. But
We're not going to add that, but just for fun, let's say SVG SVG converter. Well, this is something. Okay, yeah, SVG into images, right? So again, like there's all these ways. Once you start to dive in and you start to ramp up, like Tim said, there is a bit of a learning curve, right? And I think the big thing though is coming out of it. If you invest the time to ramp up bit by bit, there's really like it's rewarding on an iterative basis. Like everything you learn generally has like multiple applications. And so in this case, right, like we just learned about this element to image thing, and Tim made a phenomenal point, which is, hey, even if it's not an SVG, there's no reason why you can't start to daisy chain some of these other either plugins or workflows or things like that. It's really up to you. I kind of took a little bit of the easier way out, which is you can also just add conditionals, so like restrict the file type and say, have it pop up something and say, if they uploaded an SVG, just say, sorry, these are our accepted file formats or whatever. But what you described, Tim, is actually probably an even better user experience, frankly. Yeah,
that's it. It's all about the user experience these days, isn't it? So simplifying it. You don't want them to go, I can't upload this image, which is cool because it's an SVG. So let the platform do it for them, because at the end of the day, it's going to take a workflow unit or cost. If you're going to put a pop-up to convert it anyway. So and what you can do is once they've uploaded the SVG, that's converted to JPEG, PNG, etc. You can delete from database that file SVG uploaded. So there's so much that can be done.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. I mean, actually another thing that we were talking about, we jumped right into this. Actually, for didn't realize we actually didn't touch on the Friendtech thing either, but we'll come back to that. So the, as we're talking before we hopped on, in terms of some of the changes Bubble has made in terms of pricing and costs. So definitely that's something to be mindful of. Over the past year or so, they converted their pricing plan to something that takes into account workflows. So effectively, the number of workflows and the complexity of the workflows that your app runs. I've found in practice, especially after they rejiggered the calculations, which was a necessity, but after they've kind of revisited some of their calculations, I find it to be really fair. Generally speaking, unless you're building something that is really, really, really complex, and or you already have like 5-digit users who are coming in, basically even the basic user plan is more than enough to get you started on like an MVP basis, right? Like, tens or even hundreds of users coming in using the thing. So I think that's fair. But that said, I think, Tim, to your point, there is a definite benefit to developing that muscle memory in terms of just, efficient efficient programming or efficient building, no coding, I guess I could say. And part of that is, like, for instance, maintaining your database, right? Like if you're going to use an image, you're not going to use it later. Yeah, you can build a quick little function to say, I'm going to delete that thing And that stuff accrues over time, right? It may not be a huge difference when you're just launching and it's like a dozen people, but you take that and hopefully you have a good problem to have down the road, and it's 1,000 or 10,000 people.
Exactly.
Those
if you hit those big digit numbers,
yeah.
If you hit those numbers, that's going to be the least of your worries. But,
exactly, yeah.
And without jumping in, going off subject, but
yeah,
someone actually pointed out on Bubble the other day in the forum discussion that it's going to come to the point within the next couple of years that programmers or people that are developers or programmers now that write the amount of code and et cetera that they do are not going to need to do that because of the addition of artificial intelligence. It's more or less going to be the same as what we're doing now with Bubble, where we're writing conditions and actions for the AI to do the rest for us.
Totally.
So,
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because I see some Twitter or X conversations on that very topic, and there's a little bit of controversy in that. Like, I think somebody posted on TikTok. There's somebody who's pretty well known in the Bubble space, and he posted something on TikTok and got a lot of responses. Most of the responses were from traditional developers saying this would never work. This is why this is not a good idea. Like building a Nocode, right? And one of the arguments was like AI is going to basically just replace all code, like not just traditional, but also no code and things like that. I think it's going to be much closer to what you just described, right? Which is that AI will actually probably take over a lot. Not probably. It will start to take over a lot of the base programming, the traditional development, like the traditional stack. But at the end of the day, if you have something in your mind that you're trying to build, and you have a very specific vision, and you tell AI to try to build let's say this is a hypothetical future case where I'm just talking to my computer and say, you know what would be really cool? I want to build a publishing app that's like Substack, but it mints the NFT right after you create your post, right?
Yep.
And I think it's like that March of Nines concept. It's like, the first time they build it, maybe it's like 9% right. And then, several months later, it's like 90%, which is great, but there's still that 10% remaining, right? Where you have to tweak it and you have to kind of maybe fix things, or again, it's not exactly what you had in mind. I think in those cases, it's going to approach something much closer to what we're doing, where it's going to be what you see is what you get interface. I could go right in and start to view workflows and tweak them directly. Like, I kind of think of it as like the last mile of development, right? That last mile for someone who's building new product is still a necessity, because at the end of the day, the AI it's not telepathic. It's going to understand what you describe, but sometimes maybe what you describe isn't going to be detailed enough, or right? Even ChatGPT is iterative because it gets a response and you're like, that's not quite right. Hey, can you do this? Can you do that? And I think at the very, very end, like if I ask ChatGPT to like draft some tweets for me or whatever, I inevitably go in at the very, very end and still do some wordsmithing, right? Like, this word I'm going to take out. I'm going to, kind of. I think coding is going to approach that, right? There's going to be that wordsmithing step, and the ideal for that is for people, not to have to be coders to take that last step, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good point, and definitely relevant. I mean, because again, I think what we're seeing here, and that, again, the investment of time to ramp up a little bit on this stuff is well worth it. So we're gonna actually just jump in right here and maybe just do a walkthrough. I'm gonna do a walkthrough sequentially of the workflows, and then maybe step back actually in terms of the data model and how we actually pulled that in to this application. So again, if we rewind the tape, this initially as a template was really about just the app, the Bubble database itself. So you're creating articles. So actually, let's take a look at this, right? So quick primer for anybody. Again, I like to do this. I don't like to assume people, know all these screens and things like that for each of these. So if you're seeing this episode or seeing this editor for the first time, really quick primer. The Bubble editor is made up of a couple of tabs, the most important of which are the top three. So design is where you go to visually modify your application. So you can see here, Tim has a really clean look and feel, and each of these elements on the left-hand side, this is the editor view, can be expanded, collapsed, and I just know because I've been looking at this for a while that the bulk of his pages are actually saved in this kind of tree here, this category. And you can see when they're grayed out, they're hidden. So one of the things we're going to want to look at is the Write Articles view, right? The Write Articles group. And I just click the little eyeball, now it's visible. And now you can see that workflow that we just went through with all the elements. For someone looking at this for the first time, some of this may look a little weird because, again, it's kind of like the programmatic equivalent of like looking at your code as a visual reference as opposed to lines of code.
Yeah.
So that's why when you look at something like this is something called a repeating group, and you see like, oh, parent groups tags name tags. Like that's not, for someone looking at this for the first time, it's not super human readable. But as you get more familiar, like it's almost like seeing the Matrix type of thing. You'll look at this and be like, oh, okay, right. So that's just saying, we're looking at tags here. Looks like each of the cells in this repeating group is referencing a tag, and it's just basically saying, hey, for this cell, I see it has a tag. Give me the name of the tag. I'm going to print it here as text, right? So anyway, that's one example of some of the things you'll start to get familiar with in the interface.
It's similar to, if you've used WordPress, you've got Brizy, Elementor, DaVinci. Is it Divi?
Yeah.
Similar type of ways, but it's also like looking at the back end, the plugin code editor, and looking at the specific pages within those codes, like you picked up on. So it's, if you're good at WordPress and Elementor and things, you could get good at Bubble quite quickly.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I'm actually not as familiar with WordPress, so that's actually really interesting.
I came from WordPress, so that's
I mean, that could be a whole conversation too. Let me jump into the workflow page as we're talking about, but actually in your view, like I've heard something, again, I can't speak from direct experience, but I've heard some things in terms of like pros and cons of WordPress, right? Like, how do you think, how would you view the kind of trade-offs, pros and cons between a WordPress and something like a Bubble? Particularly, I would say if you're looking
Bubble
at
all day long. That's just my view. Okay?
Yeah.
It's different circumstances again, like
right.
you're saying. I'd use Shopify if it was Shopify, not Spotify. Shopify if it was drop shipping or something like that.
Right.
Along with WordPress on a lower scale.
Right.
But if it came to an application where I wasn't going to build something fully in React or something, then I would use Bubble. That was going to be moved on to a scalable, because the person, if you needed a team of developers, say you scaled to those hundreds of thousands of users, they'd be able to understand the logic in Bubble much easier, I think.
Yeah.
Going over to a custom designed platform rather than on a WordPress.
Yeah.
And I think Bubble is more secure. Personally, I think Bubble is more secure than WordPress.
Yeah. So. Especially since they just got their SOC compliance, which is a big, in my prior lives. Yeah. I came from the financial services sector in my prior lives, and SOC 2, I think it's SOC 2. SOC 2 is a pretty big thing, right? So as institutions, like enterprise level institutions, look to potentially build a no-code, that's like a must-have. Like you kind of need you need that. So that's pretty big, and definitely speaks to like what you said, the security side. I think the other point you made, which is a great segue into this view, which is the workflow page. For the average user, being able to see workflows almost as like logical building blocks, it's just much more intuitive. My understanding of something like WordPress, the heritage of WordPress is a blogging platform, right? So I think if they have logic and things like that, my understanding is still programmatic, like it's low code rather than no code. Like if you need to build something, you have to basically start injecting JavaScript and stuff like that. Whereas here, the logic is also fully no code. Like for instance, we're going to look at this workflow in particular. You can see if I hover over it, it's pointed to the Publish button, and there's a couple ways we can get to this, right? I just happen to know that this is the one that we need to look at, just again from having worked in this template directly. But if we needed to find it, we could do certain things as well. Like go to the visual editor, hover over publish. I could actually look at this button in the, if I just did reveal an element tree, I could see where it's located in our hierarchy of elements. But the other thing I can do is start edit workflow. And that'll take us directly to that button, right? So if I click that button, this is the workflow that'll kick off. And we're going to come back to this, but this is the thing that really, like, again, we talked about that sequence of events. We want to capture the image. We want to load that image to IPFS. We want to then take the resulting hash link, or effectively the address of that image, and then use that to create our NFT, right? And so this is the button that kicks that all off, right? And so the thing that we want to do preceding this is just give a little context in terms of the data side of it. So again, if we started with a clean slate, just a non-Web3 template, one of the first things that we'll want to do is actually port over some of the data models, right? And so what I actually did is I had my other template, which is the Marketplace template. It's up to V5 now. And this is an example of what you could do. There's no reason why you couldn't also build your own NFT object, but there's a couple things that work together when you're looking to mint an NFT for the first time. One is you do need a collection object, which is the collection or smart contract that the NFT is going to be minted to. So that's one object that we're going to want to bring over. That's this, right? The collection object. We're also going to want to bring over, obviously the NFT object itself, right? And we have another couple things that we want to bring over. They're not as critical, as the prior two, collection and NFT. Those are really like the core objects that we need. But we had, again, this is through iterations, but we have an object that is used to track the ownership of 1155 NFTs. For those who aren't familiar, 1155s, there's two flavors of NFTs, 721 and 1155. 721 are what people typically refer to as one of ones. So there's only ever one edition of that token, one version of that token. And then 1155s, you can basically create as many editions as possible. Some people refer to them as multiple editions. And because of that, the ownership, the tracking of the ownership can be a little hairy, right? You can literally have thousands of owners of a particular NFT in that case. And so we have this object here called the NFT owner object, which is basically specifically designed to track that ownership. And we also, down the road, if you need it, we also have some workflows to like refresh that ownership and things like that. But yeah, those are really the three main, let's say, objects that we're going to need for creating like the NFTs and creating the posts. There is another object that we brought over and would bring over, which is the technical settings, right? So the technical settings. Oops, let me go back down to that one. Right. So the technical settings are effectively like the configurations, right? It's app level. It's not designed really to be like user accessible. It's really something for the app to kind of understand. Okay, for one, let's say, we can actually look at some of the live. And it's pointing to that already. We can look at some of the live data in here already. Again, someone looking at this for the first time, your eyes may glaze over a little bit. There's a lot of stuff going on here. But if we just look at, for instance, two things in particular, right? Chain title, chain ID, right? And so again, if an app is Web 2, it's not going to have any concept of what a chain is. Like, it doesn't know Ethereum from a hole in the ground, right? The setting technical object or technical settings object, it is the thing that now brings that knowledge to the app, right? It's the thing that stores all of the key references, URLs, API endpoints. Another really critical thing for pointing to a chain is the RPC URL, right? That's if you want to just pull stuff down from the public, from the chain. But the two most important things, one is the chain ID, and the other, chain title, this is more to make it human readable. Not everybody knows what different chain IDs stand for, but those are the two key things, right? Because then I can further bring in some option set values. So again, option sets. This is another concept that is really handy for Bubble. For somebody who's trying to make sense of this for the first time, you're like, I thought I just created data. Like, what is this option set thing? So the way to think about this, if I look at these data types, these are the things that I'm creating in the database. So Bubble refers to them as things, which I think is kind of neat. It's again an abstraction. I could create a data type here called chair, right? Like whatever. That's like a classic programming example when they first start to teach people about object-oriented programming. They'll say, I'm going to create an object. It's called a chair. And they would ask the class, what are the things you would say or describe a chair? And I would say, it has X number of legs. It is made of wood or plastic or steel. And it has a certain height, width, all these things. They're just characteristics of a chair. And to create a chair, I literally just create this object. That's it. I now have a chair object. I will delete this later. But as part of creating this, right, I can say, what is the material of my chair? And so this is where things get interesting, and this is where I think the onset of option sets is really useful because, I could save this as a text, right? I could create a material, and then every time I create a chair, I got to type in like, hey, this thing's made of wood, or this thing's made of like cherry oak, or like whatever, and it gets there's two potential problems with that. One is typos. So we're all human, right? And if you're typing this stuff in every time, you can misspell something, and then that will have repercussions in your code because let's say you're looking for things that are made of wood, and I don't know, you put one O instead of two O's, you're not going to be able to find that thing, right? Because it's been mistyped. So the other way to do this, and this is where option sets come in, option sets are not things. They're not the things in the database. They're basically predefined menus, more or less. They're predefined, options that you can select from, right? And so in this case, again, I'm going to delete this later, but I could create one called, chair materials. Speaking of typos,
they're similar to categories you'd find on an e-commerce website. Shoes,
that is a perfect use for it. Actually, like I could again create a category. I'd have X number of predefined values. The way to maybe think about it is like typically anything that I not all cases, but if I am creating a drop down menu in my interface, actually like you have one. Right, where you have different categories for the posts. It's like Web3, multi-metaverse, et cetera, that could be a good candidate for an option set, right?
Yeah.
And so, I'm going to create wood, steel.
I've got option sets as date ascending, date descending, most viewed, most liked, things like that. So, which is a drop down. So it's a filter.
Yeah.
It's anything that you need to sort of simplify the display that's on screen as well.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's like I said, it is a menu of items that you're gonna want to reuse, like more than a few times. And especially if it's central to sorting, filtering, things that require like a lookup, then like I said, you're better off using an option set because you just want to avoid little errors like typos and things like that, right? And so I just created this option set called chair materials. I'm going to go back to my data type. I'm going to create a parameter of my chair called materials. And this is pretty cool. I mean, these are like the little things that add up for Bubble, which I really love. I just searched for materials. I literally just created it 2 seconds ago, but there it is. I can find it like right away. And now I have a parameter of my new object, chair of materials, and I can select a default, but there you go. There's my predefined thing. So I don't have to type anything. I can just select. And then again, when I start to build in logic, it's clickable, right? I can build logical expressions by clicking through different option sets, different values, without having to retype everything, right? So that's where things start to compound, and you really start to get, again, like, I think of Bubble as a very handy and clever layer of abstraction, or several layers of abstraction on top of traditional coding. Underneath the hood of Bubble, there's nothing. They haven't created any type of new language or anything like that. They're using JavaScript. They're using CSS, HTML, all the things a traditional website
TypeScript
use.
Is it? Is it TypeScript?
I think. Oh, actually, yeah. I think they're converting to TypeScript. I do think they use some flavor of JavaScript previously that they're trying to move away from. I think it was like CoffeeScript or something like that. But
right.
But yeah, at the end of the day, it ultimately translates into JavaScript. And so all these things that they've kind of built on top of it, it's just a really effective abstraction, meaning like I can manipulate, I can create, I can build logic on all of that stuff without ever having to really understand JavaScript, right? And you're not.
But you can add JS. You can, like, when the page is loaded, run JS, or this HTML tag is this HTML with a custom CSS dragged into the page, which is hidden as well.
Yeah.
So it's actually, rather than being the back end like another website where that HTML or CSS is always loaded.
Yeah.
The only time this HTML or CSS is loaded is when that path is visible or engaged in. So it speeds up the site as well,
Totally. Yeah. And I think, again, kudos to them. When I stumbled across Bubble 2 years ago, I definitely approached it with some skepticism, because I come from a product background, so I typically, just approach these things with, like, a grain of salt, right? Like, Nocode traditionally has always had some level of constraints. And the more I got into Bubble, I was like, okay, I can do this, I can do that. Like, what about this? And maybe it would take some iterations. Like, nothing. Sometimes there isn't something readily available out of the box, but because you can always either integrate JavaScript, or build a custom plugin with some JavaScript, or use things like, actually, there's what is it? I think a plugin called Toolbox. Which again, community built, which has some really cool things that you can start to do with just directly injecting JavaScript into the app. So, like, all of those things are still available. It doesn't block you from adding code where you need it. And again, that's probably not something you would do day one if you're just starting to learn, but it's not a bad thing to have that option as you go down the road. And so what we're going to do here, like I said, I think in terms of time, oh my God, time flies. What I'm going to do is actually, just as an example, show how you can literally copy and paste an entire data model by copying and pasting. So, again, we have this already established in the Publish database. So we're not going to leverage this from the workflows. We'll just look at the workflows we already had. But just so people can understand how easy it is, I'm going to copy and paste, and I literally just pasted this entire data model into my new app. So this is what I basically did to bring over collections, NFTs, and NFT owner, right? And like I said, I'm going to delete this right now, but you can see I literally just, right clicked on my other app. The thing you would need to do, though, is just make sure you have permissions for both of these editors, because it is intelligent enough to know that, like, hey, wait a minute, you're not an editor in this other app. Like, you shouldn't be messing around with the data model. But if you are permissioned, then it knows that, like, you can paste it, no worries. And the other thing you can do is, and the technical settings. That was another one that I copy and pasted. And there are a couple things in terms of option sets that we wanted to bring over too. We're not going to get into these too much. Oh, there's your category option set. Nice. Yeah. So fiat target currency. That's something that the technical settings use for translating prices. Again, not a must-have, but as is, the object is looking for that, so you might as well bring it over. Otherwise, it's going to throw a little bit of an error and say, hey, I'm looking for something called a fiat target currency. It doesn't exist. What do I do? Same thing with checkout settings. This is down the road for credit card purchases. And this is one where we're basically, again, this is kind of the currency thing, right? Configuring different NFTs to be able to translate, if this for exchange rate purposes, translate between certain cryptocurrencies and fiat currencies and things like that. But same thing here, exactly the same process to bring that over. Literally copy and paste. Like I just went over, found my fiat target currency. I'm going to rename this so we don't actually delete the one that we're supposed to be using. Again, speaking of typos. So we got the fiat target currency, copy, go over, right click, paste. There you go. I now have an object with all the. I think the thing here that is really nice is if you have a more layered structure of these different options, it doesn't just have to be text, right? Like category is most likely text, right? Yeah. So, text and an image, but each of these options can then be also extended to have all these other concepts. Like, it has like USD, it has a display, but it also has a symbol. I want the actual symbol of USD, so I can put that, and then I can retrieve that later when I select that option. And that gets more and more sophisticated down the road. Like I didn't bring it in here, but I have, for example, an option set for my technical settings, which will be more important as we actually, Tim, this is actually probably something for you. We probably will want to bring this over. Actually, you know what? I am going to bring this over because this is where we have these predefined stored values if I ever want to switch chains, right? If I want to go from testnet to ETH mainnet or testnet to Polygon mainnet, these are the values I want to pull and then populate that technical setting object with, right? So somewhere on an admin screen or something like that, and you can also reference this. We have that same workflow in the one.Market template, actually on the admin tab, the admin screen. And actually, let's look at that just so people can see it directly. And again, click the workflows. And
the cool thing you've done with one.Market is allow individuals to have their own front-facing page, sort of like their old MySpace page, which is their own website, where they can put their own NFTs on and mint them straight away and get 100% royalties and things without having to go through a third party.
Yeah,
it's great. That is, that's what's coming to. But again, at the same time, it's full control by them rather than these other these other platforms that offer them. So
full, totally, and that again, that was an iterative process. We're always on the lookout for best-in-class services and features and things like that. But we finally got there. I think actually, like you said, one.Market v5 is really that tipping point where all the things that we previously envisioned that we would love to have, like email login, actually a mobile experience. It's one of the things we didn't have when we first started. All these little things come together, but not least of which, like you said, very critical, being able to deploy your own marketplace contract. This is via Third Web, so their latest marketplace contract is v3. We've incorporated that as well as of maybe a month or two ago. And now you have complete control not only of your app, not only of your code, but also of your order book, if you will, your marketplace, right? And you can set your own royalties. You can set also, you can go as far as basically setting parameters around things like your drops and claims, things like that. So really, that was, and it continues to be the goal, which is give people more tools to build what's in their head, but give them the opportunity to build with, again, best-in-class services and the latest and greatest UX, right? Like build a really cool experience where they can target users that have no idea what Web3 is. And by the way, they don't need to know. Like if you really want to kind of go down, take it to that level, you can. So Yeah, no, totally appreciate that, and I think it's we're definitely not done. We're not done by a long shot. It's going to be a continual process, but that's the that's the end goal, right? Or
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
yeah that's the long term goal is to continue to chip away and make it even easier, even less costly, and I think
It's just about the evolution of the technology and the platforms, isn't it? It's just,
mm-hmm.
We've gone from NFT DApp marketplaces 2017, 2018,
Yeah.
now going to fully fledged NFT marketplaces, having gasless minting, lazy minting,
Yep.
things like this, just making it easier,
Totally.
Everything is, keep it, as we said in the last call, keep it simple, stupid. That's how it should be.
Totally.
It's so simple, your grandmother could use it.
Totally.
That's the saying.
Yeah. And I think that goes for the builder too, right? So like what we're doing here is again, I think this is a really cool example because we're picking in selectively each of the pieces we need for the step we're at in the development process, right? So like case in point right here, to get the thing stood up in a demo environment, we know we want to, use Polygon Mumbai, which is the test net for Polygon. So we didn't need necessarily the different option settings and admin settings and stuff like that, but we will need that pretty soon. And the cool thing or the nice thing is we can just pull that in as and when we need it, and so we don't have a lot of bloat to start, right? We don't need to take everything in the kitchen sink over. But certainly, that's where hopefully this walkthrough, right, where we can start to point people in the right direction. And I think one of the things that I'm kind of focused on is trying now to build out more of the resources, like the educational side of it, so people have a better working understanding of where to find what they need, right? As opposed to right now, I'm pretty sure most of what you need is in the template or in the plugins. Now the challenge is helping people actually understand what's available, where to find it, and how to use it, right? So.
The good thing again about Bubble is not limited to your community, but there is a Bubble forum. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of YouTube tutorials out there, and the people that teach it are teaching it, as if it's the basic way to do it. It's very simple to understand, really. Especially if you built out the type of websites, WordPress, Shopify, things like these.
Yeah.
So but we're talking about simplicity, and we were talking at the top of the call about Friendtech. Did you want to go into that a little bit, or did you want to leave that for another day?
Let me finish out this one thought in terms of, because actually this is something you're probably going to need, Tim, which is.
All right, apologies for interrupting.
Oh no, not at all. No, I think this is perfect. I actually would love to get into some of the Friendtech conversation, because I think that's again really relevant to what we're thinking about, what we're talking about. Yeah. So, but just to kind of finish this out, we have this. We kind of went through. We have this object for technical settings. It's set up in a very specific way, which is it intentionally only ever has one line item in the database, and that's again, it's a configuration. It's a configuration thing, right? So the app just needs to know, hey, when I'm opened by the user, what chain should I be targeting? Where should I be pointing? Things like that. It doesn't necessarily need multiple versions of that. Although I actually have had people who are interested in making a multi-chain application. They would have multiple instances of this object, like a couple rows here. And that's if they wanted their app to be able to point at Polygon for one NFT, at Ethereum for a second NFT, at what have you, some other alt chain for a third NFT. So it does have that potential application. There's some things you need to set up around that, but at the root of it, that is certainly possible. But we're only going to stick with one. And then, all I wanted to do was just kind of walk through, you can take a look at this, but at the end of the day, if the user clicks a button or selects in a dropdown, I want to change from Mumbai to Polygon mainnet. They could select in a dropdown, click, save, and we want to run something like this, which is make changes to the technical settings object, and basically just effectively overwrite, right? We want to kind of save the values we have. And here's where the option set comes in, right? So I have an option set, which is literally selecting from this, right? Here's my settings technical option set. So the drop down would have each of these options. And if I selected one, like Polygon mainnet, for instance, I have all of these predefined values that are stored here. Again, critical one being chain ID, let's say, things like that. And the workflow really is, hey, they picked something from the dropdown, which means they selected a certain, menu item in the option set, let's say. Now we have that menu item. Now we can take all the subsequent values in that item and start to populate, right? So that's exactly what we're doing. So we're saying, okay, hey, I want to take chain ID, chain title from the option set and start to effectively copy them in, paste them in, and overwrite. So you can actually take like a lot of things. Like you could probably, I think, copy and paste this workflow and start to work with that. But and then actually I think there's two of these, because some of these I added later on, which are not necessarily driven by an option set. They're like API keys, right? So like if I needed to start punching in API keys, these are coming from inputs rather than from the option set. So had a little second addendum, I guess, to this. Okay, so so Friendtech, I think that is also a really salient thing. It's obviously one of the, hey, it's been a little while since Web3 had like a trend, a little kind of like I don't know,
viral push.
Yeah, maybe it's more than a fad. I don't know. I think it's we'll see what happens. It remains to be seen, but certainly garnering interest. And it's kind of the app of the moment for Web3. And I think the couple things, as I literally just had the opportunity to start looking at it like yesterday, but a couple of things that stood out to me were the user experience.
Yeah.
So one is this whole PWA. For people who haven't heard what PWA is, it's a progressive web app, which basically means it's a website that's built in a way that is friendly for mobile screens, right? That's kind of the simplified version of it. You can do other things like integrate to different. So basically, it's a web app built to look and feel like an iPhone app or an Android app. And did you have something to say?
I don't understand why they haven't made it desktop too at this moment in time, because the majority of crypto users and Web3 users do use desktop. Right. I'd say 10% of the time will I use anything through my mobile wallet.
Yeah.
But if I'm paying for something using crypto in a conference or something, yes. Yeah. But the majority of things are still using desktop while keeping the mobile factor at hand too.
Yeah.
But
agreed.
On desktop, there's a lot more. You can spread things out. You can do, there's more things you can do. And I just think Friendtech has a very good foundation layer, but it's been thrown up very quickly.
Yeah.
Because literally a weekend bubble with someone like yourself could replicate Friendtech very quickly, plus more, especially with all the tools and plugins that you have now within the company. So,
Yeah. So a little bit of a teaser there. I am kicking around the idea of doing exactly that. So we'll put a pin in that one for now. But the thought intrigued me of trying to see what would happen. This is where it all starts, right? Like this is how one all started 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, which is like what if, like I wonder, maybe it's more like I wonder if it would be possible, or I wonder what it would take to build a Friendtech clone in Nocode.
What you tend to find in Web3 is, especially when you go into the VCs, I work with quite a few of them, and that's why I play about with these type of ideas, see if something sticks. But Friendtech did not have, there wasn't a problem, and it wasn't a solution that was needed, but it's a platform that's worked. So when people say, "Oh, your idea is not a problem, that people need a solution for," things like that, it doesn't matter. Look at what happened to Friendtech, and it does work. So take that as a starting point.
Lightning in a bottle, man. It's like sometimes you don't know, and that's why I think approaching things iteratively and just having exactly like what you're doing is just sometimes you just want to see if something sticks, right? Like if what's the feedback, what's the response,
Yeah,
and I think again that's a big reason. This is with my product hat on. That's a big reason why something like Bubble is so like compelling to me, because back in the day when I was building product for like enterprises and things like that, we'd actually go through a very similar process, but our demos and
yeah,
things like that would be much more crude, you know? Like we literally went through a phase where we were recreating apps by like having a clickable PowerPoint and just like
yeah, yeah.
pretending like, hey, so never mind that these are just slides in a PowerPoint, but like what if you clicked here, it would kind of look like this and that and this, you know?
There's some, I know I'm not going to name them, but I know some companies that have literally offered a product or solution, like a software as a service, and they have had humans doing the work in the background and making it look like it's AI and things. It's just evolve. If it's in demand and you can make a business out of it, evolve it. If it doesn't, shelve it, learn from it, move on to the next thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that again, like dovetails with what we're doing here. You can not only build a demo, you can build a workable prototype in about the same time as previously you'd spend like drawing up all these slides and stuff like that. And then secondly, I think there's something to be said. I agree. Like the whole Friendtech thing where they don't have a desktop equivalent. In fact, they actively have code to deter you from opening it up in a desktop. I think that's probably because one, like you said, they just didn't want to build the desktop version first. They're just kind of like picking their spots. Maybe there's also the social side of it where they just kind of see the social aspect as being more of a mobile thing. Showing it, putting it in front of a friend and say, hey, this is how you do it and whatever. And I do think though that one of the most clever things that I give them kudos for is just going straight to install on the homepage. So for folks who haven't seen it, if you go to Friendtech on a mobile app, it'll basically say, hey, to install this app, and they give you two flavors of instructions. One is for Safari, one is for Chrome, but more or less, both of them basically have this thing which says, install app to homepage, which more or less is basically just copying a link to the web page on your homepage with the icon. But like, again, because the way they built it, it looks and feels like an app. Like there's actually there's no real visible way to like tell the difference, really. So I think that was really clever, and I think that might have merited, from their perspective, them focusing on mobile rather than desktop, because I just think like as soon as you get into desktop, you have so many different flavors of like browsers and like operating systems, and then people are just like their heads just start to explode, especially if like, again, new users, right? Like I see now in X or Twitter, there's just every couple days there's somebody like, hey, I'm trying Friendtech now, whatever. And it's not Web3 people, these are people who are just like average users, which is the goal, right? Like that's the whole thing. Like we want to make something, an experience that is not intimidating, that is like, very usable. And maybe that's a thing. Like maybe like making it a progressive web app is a step towards that goal,
The bloody clever thing is they've not used their own KYC technology or anything at all. They've literally used Twitter, which is the biggest degen chat room of all crypto people, and they've used that to verify their users, which is a clever, as again, UX. It's a clever way of just implementing something straight off the cuff to make sure that the information is correct and it's accurate, so it is the actual account. So people should take that.
That's the other thing. So the Twitter integration, and then we were talking about this before we went live. I think there is a difference between authentication versus API, right? So the API is crazy. It's like, this is the thing that made the headlines, is like $30,000, something crazy, right? It's like,
too much.
You definitely don't want to be integrating to the API. But I think the authentication, the OAuth, right, the logging in and connecting the app, if you're just pulling stuff that's from the profile, the user's profile itself, I think that's a separate integration. That's not like the $30,000, right?
Well, I've done that with LinkedIn and with Google. So I've captured data from LinkedIn using API in my previous platform, Fastmore. But I got the photo, the image, the profile picture. I got the email address, the name, the location.
Yeah.
But I haven't figured out with Twitter yet because I think due to the APIs and all that, it's still costly.
Right.
So
could be, yeah. So that if and again, this may be episode 5. We'll see. I see. Welcome, Hair Bear Club, who just posted something. He also has some questions about template. Maybe that makes it to episode 5 too. But at some point, like I said, I am curious about the Friendtech thing. I would, if I were to tackle it, I would start to think about 3 things. Like, one is the progressive web app side, right? Trying to figure out how to structure that. That I've done before. I think some of the things there's kind of like known approaches there, right? There's a plugin where you can use to detect the device that the user is using, for instance. So you could do stuff around that. The second thing would be the Twitter integration, right? So like kind of figuring out that part of it and seeing, obviously, if there's a way to do it without paying $30,000. And thirdly would be the contract. So the bonding curve contract. It's a little bit controversial. I think, again, when we're talking before we went on, I think that's probably the most controversial side of it is the bonding curve. For folks who don't know, it's a little bit of a misnomer because I've actually literally just been reading up on this too in the past few days. But the bonding curve is not a mathematical function per se. It's actually more of a market maker. It basically is a thing that buys and sells or allows users to buy and sell tokens on a more or less an automated basis. Right. And so it's kind of this like autonomous little contract that like basically holds or retains a bunch of tokens. In this case, for Friendtech, they're all ERC20 tokens, as I understand. But no reason why it couldn't actually be an NFT as well or whatnot. But basically, the thing that's a little controversial with Friendtech is like the price at which you buy and or sell any given token. They call them keys, but they're tokens. Is a function of how many of those tokens are in circulation. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know the exact curve of it, but it's like something exponential. So it's like, if you have a couple keys, it's like $5 or something like that to buy someone's key. And then if they get up to like 100 or more, then you're talking like $1,000 or something like that, right?
Right.
Like half an.
Oh, so it's like it's without putting this towards them. It's sort of like an MLM. It's sort of like a step up. I don't use that other word, but higher you go, the higher it becomes, sort of.
Yeah. So it has elements of that, right? And so who knows? Again, these things are always a little bit of alchemy. You're trying to see like that. Was that part of it being lightning in a bottle? Maybe. Certainly some people, approach it from the profit-taking perspective again. So again, we'll kind of put that aside for now, not to kind of step on any triggering topics there. But I think at its core, if I think about it more from the technical side, that's an area of interest for me to like explore, just to figure out, because I haven't really dealt with bonding curves as a contract in the past. Yeah. And so what would be interesting to explore there is, one, what does the bonding curve actually look like? And then second, is there a way to actually, if we wanted to, like clone an existing contract, right? And have it effectively operate the same way, or go in and clone it but then revise it, right? So I think those are kind of 3 things that would be interesting to look at. And bringing it back to your app, I think in some ways the process is similar at the highest level, which is when you're approaching any given project. And this comes a little bit with experience, but even if you're approaching something for the first time, it helps to kind of break them down into like bite size, or at least not as like intimidating chunks, right? So like when we talk about Publish.place, and actually when we were talking through DMs and when you initially approached me with the concept, I think this idea of like, how do I add minting to this thing? It's like this like unknown, and it's just like this like almost again overwhelming like task to take on, right? It helps to take that and just as best you can start to break it down into like more manageable pieces, right? So it's like, again, what we just did, what we walked through was like, okay, let's see. I know I want to add NFTs to this thing. Well, right now the app doesn't know how to doesn't know what an NFT is. So first thing I probably want to do is bring over the data types. So we've done that, right? Now maybe it knows the data types, but well, second thing actually is the plugins. So we did have, you had some of them because you were already starting to implement things like Web3 auth, but we did need to bring in things like Third Web, right? Web3 storage for IPFS. Those are the critical ones. And then, like we said earlier on, this unique one for our particular use case, bubble element to image. Again, really, really great plugin. And so we want to do that. So let's say, first chunk, bring over the data types, double check that. Second chunk, bring over the plugins, make sure those are set up. So episode 2, I believe, of Building Web3 Anything, we walk through specifically how to set up certain plugins, how to actually literally go to their site and get the API keys and stuff like that. So you have to do some of that. And then thirdly, workflows. So what I did here is I actually saved, so this is actually a little bit of a best practice, right? I saved your original workflow because I didn't want to just like wholesale just like get rid of it, and then we'd be like, if we ever wanted to look back, like, wait, what did this thing do before Andrew started messing around with it? Again, like a lot of bubble things, it's pretty intuitive. Like I right click, I could copy and paste, and then I would just go into the original. I did add a little text, I added this original just to make it a little more clear. And then you can disable the workflow, which is why it's a little grayed out. But now we have the original if we ever needed it. And then like in a pinch, we needed to just like be like, oh my God, again, Andrew screwed this thing up. We need to like revert, on that front, the protective Andrew measures, we can, another really, really big one is before any changes you make, you want to definitely create a save point. So, you go over here, you go to history, create save point, and actually might as well just do one.
On mine, I haven't got into all that part yet. Even though I've been on Bubble a while, I still haven't played about with branches and all them things. Again, because it's a test app, I tend to just go with, if I like it, it works in preview, I'll save it. So,
I mean, even if you're not, even if you don't necessarily even need to do it when you're deploying per se. I like to do it just because if I know I'm starting the day and I have, like, let's say the Friendtech thing, right? I'm like, I have the progressive web application structure set up. The next thing I want to do for that day is start to like experiment with the Twitter stuff. I'll start the day by creating a save state in history, and then I'll just mess around, like. And I can always I can click the back button to back out, but sometimes, you like, it happens. You're in the midst of building, and then like you're maybe building 2 or 3 things at the same time, or there's like 3 things that fit together, and then you just lose track. You're like, wait a minute, I made this change over here, but where was that other thing that I was working on? Like, did I make that change or did not? And then like sometimes you just need to be like, okay, wait, I'm just gonna like rewind the tape and go back to like 9 a.m. or whenever when I started this. So it's again, just a nice, like I said, muscle memory, right? It's a good best practice just in case. You can always eyeball it too. Like, another pretty cool thing is Bubble. You can always revert to a specific time and date. Obviously not as an exact science there. You're kind of like, finger in the air. It's like, I think I was working on this, 11 yesterday. So, let's revert it to 9.
You should always follow sort of product management routes and a product development route. If you come from that part, you can do the same in Element, or you can revert to a different timeline. But it's still helpful to plan your day out with it like a checklist. What you're going to go with on paper, so sort of.
Totally. I'll tell you where this came from in my experience. It's from so I used to work in, again, the finance sector, and I used to build my fair share of like monstrous Excel spreadsheets. And I can't tell you the number of times, you learn the hard way, right? The number of times I had a massive spreadsheet and the computer like froze, and I just like lost like, easily like a day's worth of just like massive formula building and stuff like that. And I just got into a habit of like literally every 10 minutes or something, just saving a version. Like I'm not going to get like hosed the same way. So I think maybe some of that translated over to the product, and then, here the no coding side of it as well. Anyhow, this has been, I love these conversations. So that's it. I'm going to try to go through, and I think, again, we might not have time. It doesn't look like we'll have time to build this from scratch, but I do want to step through all the workflows in sequence and talk them through in more detail. You have an idea, and then other people have an idea of what it would take. So first thing we'll do is we'll do a little compare and contrast, right? So I'm actually going to move this out of the way so we can see. So your original had a couple of key things. One is create the article, which is pulling, certain values for an article. So again, the object is the article, which it may have come in built in. But either way, we have this thing that we can use. So we're going to create a new article. We're going to take some of the values from the input form, that really nice text editor that we use at the very start. And we're going to create an article with all these things populated. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to take that article, we're going to save it to the current user. So again, now we have, and also do some time tracking, which is cool. And you have your point system. That's your special sauce. So we're not going to get too much in that. But needless to say, we're going to save some values to the current user, most important of which is actually saving this article, so that now we have a way to look up later and basically say, hey, can we look up all the articles this user created? And this would be it. We're actually creating a list here. The way you can tell if something is a list versus a single value is if it's a single value, you'll just have an equal sign. So I'm going to set, last activity time to blah. Yeah. If it's a list, you'll see a couple different options, and I'll hope not to screw things up here. You can add, you can remove, you can set list, add list. So there's slightly different options if something is a list. So again, think of it as like, I'm going to add something, I'm going to add something to the list. I'm going to take something off the list. And then you have an alert, which is good user experience. And then basically from there, you're done. So like in the old world, you create the object, you set the user to, point to that object or list of objects. You threw up an alert that said, cool, you just did it. And then you have some view tracking or some states here, some parameters to basically, to determine what view the user is looking at. So this is this value here. And then actually, I think you had something that was not fully finished here, but you could then make changes to the article after that. And this is a simple scroll, which is just resetting the screen, scrolling back to the top of the screen. So that was the original, right? And now, again, this kind of mental approach of like, okay, we want to start to chunk this up a little. It's almost like building a stretch limousine, right? Like you have the front and back of a Cadillac, you chop it down the middle, and you got the front part and the back part. And we want to ultimately have both, but there's going to be now more stuff in the middle. We're going to build the middle of the limousine, right? So the front part is the same. We still want to create an article. We still want to add that article to the user. But we're going to do something here too, which is we created a new state. The dashboard is the page. We created a new state in the dashboard called new article, and we're going to save this article object, right? Because we're going to use that later on. We want it to be readily accessible. And, one thing about Bubble is there's no explicit kind of mode to save like local variables. I just want something to be stored while the user is using it. I don't necessarily want to save it in the database or something so long-term. And while that's not explicit, the usage of states basically serves that purpose, right? So a state is like every element can have states. And you can almost just think of states like replace the word state with variable, and that's kind of the same thing. So every element has open-ended, set of variables that you can apply to it, or states. And that's what we're doing here. So we're staring at the page level. I think it was actually last episode that I was talking to Joseph. I like to save it at the page level, not because the app wouldn't work if I saved it in some other element, but it's just from a builder's perspective. I know where all the key variables are. They're just all in the same place, right? So I don't kind of just get lost. Or worse, like I don't accidentally reference the variable at the page level in one instance and at some other random element level in another instance, and then I'm wondering like, why doesn't this thing work? It doesn't find right. So so stuff like that. So, and then actually now we want to capture the image, and so I did make a few changes here. One is to I think originally these were actually separate elements, just kind of all located together on the page. This is the title, this is the body. So I actually just right-click these, group this element in a column container. I'm not going to do it right now because it's already grouped. And then I added the body text to it. And so if I viewed this, so again, you can do reveal an elements tree. If I viewed this in the element tree, okay, so there's a couple things in this parent, this title group, which is okay. But then I have the text here, and I think there's another one that's maybe hidden. But basically, the two main things I wanted to say in this case, capture and create an image out of, they're all contained in one group, which is this one. Oops, sorry, actually, this one. There we go. And what we should see, if I can move this up, what we did is we added an ID to this element. So this is basically a bridge into actual code. In HTML, all of the elements have the option to have two things applied to them. One is an ID, one is a class. At the end of the day, they're basically shorthand ways for an application to like categorize different types of elements on the page. Like, I have headers. Headers is the classic one. I have header, header 1, header 2, header 3. I have paragraphs. I have images. Like all those things can be categorized with an ID or a class. And in this case, there is a way in Bubble to access that, right? So I'm actually going to apply this. I just created this, capture me. It could be anything. One really quick offshoot here, though, to do this, actually, rather than step through that actual page, to do this, you can go to settings, and there's you can look on forum, the Bubble forum, for example. There's a setting to actually turn that on. You do have to turn on the ability to use HTML ID attributes, so it's in Bubble, but it's a little bit more of an advanced thing. But once you do that, this is now visible. I'm going to apply this again, like we saw over here. This is it. This is that group, right, containing the header and the body. And this is why it was captured, is because I applied this ID capture me to that group. And then back in the workflow, in addition to dropping, as with most plugins in Bubble, sometimes you do need to drop the actual plugin element into the page. So I think I've dropped it, somewhere here. And somewhere on the page.
So the element ID is the same as a class ID?
Yeah, there isn't, it's funny, right? So in my experience, there isn't really a big difference between IDs and classes. You can more or less use them for the same purposes. Like, for instance, a big reason why you'd use ID and classes is for custom styling. Like, if I want, like, if you go to one.Io, the homepage, there's like a ton of like graphical stuff going on. There's like text scrolling and like stuff, like all this stuff, which, by the way, again, I basically learned that just like knocking my head against the wall, like trying to figure it out. But a lot of that uses like classes and IDs, because then what you can typically do is you take that ID and then you can put some custom styling code onto it, like, hey, animate this or change this color or move it left to right or whatever.
Yeah.
My sense is ID and classes. It's more of the usage. It's kind of like the what is it? The precedent, or like the way people typically use them. That's the difference. There's not any technical reason why you could use one versus the other, as far as I know. And the typical usage is that ID is typically used for a specific element. So if I'm targeting, like in this case, I can use ID because I know it's just this one group that I want to target, right? And it's more of that. It's like the one thing. It's the one element versus the many, right? If I wanted to target a set of IDs that share a common attribute or of the same category, then I might want to use a class in that case, right?
Yeah.
And again, there's a really handy plugin called, if I'm not mistaken, Classify. Maybe we'll do a really quick look up here. I think there's a couple, and if you spend some time in the bubble forums, there's just a couple of plugins that have just become like instrumental in in the bubble community, right? One is Classify. There it is. You see the fiery fist. It's like very rebellious. And this one is cool because what it does is it gives you the ability to actually add classes in addition to IDs to particular elements. Then you have Toolbox, which I would say I mentioned earlier. This is the JavaScript one. So you can use this to do some pretty cool things and actually build JavaScript directly into the page, without having to build like a custom plugin or anything like that. So those are a couple of cool things. But yeah, I think in this case, we just want to use an ID because it's just one element, one specific element that we're capturing. And once we put the plugin element on the page, we now have access to these actions. And one I'm going to use is capture element. And here we go. We put in the ID that we just put on that group. We can come up with an arbitrary file name. In this case, it doesn't really matter, but you can also make this dynamic by putting an expression. But we're not gonna do that in this case. Now what? Now where does it go? Right now we kind of have like a little bit of a cliffhanger. Like, okay, where does this logic go? Typically, for plugins that have a specific action that can be called, there is like a corresponding trigger, let's say, right? That is the pair, right? You have the action and the response, let's say, too, right? There's a response.
Yeah.
And in this case, the response is going to be somewhere down here, which is this element capture succeeded. And I'm pretty sure there's one for failing too, in which case you could have that, and you could put a little alert, like a little error alert. But this thing is pretty, like I said, it's a pretty good plugin. So more often than not, it's pretty much always worked. So now we can continue the logical daisy chain, right? So again, we kind of thought of our block. Step one, we want to capture the element. Step two, we want to upload it to IPFS. So that's the next thing, right? So the thing succeeded. It's let the app know it succeeded, which is, again, a really cool bubble thing. Like, you can just start to see the Lego blocks here. Now we want to do other stuff. Okay, it succeeded. What do we want to do? First, we want to pop up a little alert. So if I'm watching this, I know what step it's on. There's other ways to do this from a UX perspective. I actually, like in the one.Market template, we have a single pop-up, and it actually progresses through a list of things. Like if you ever, go on OpenSea or Rarible or some of these sites, it's kind of cool. It's like just like a status progress, type of pop-up. So you can do that too. It does take a little bit more time to do that, but nothing preventing you from doing that. In this case, we just fired a simple alert. And the next thing we're going to do is upload to Web3 storage. So Web3 storage is another pretty key plugin, one of the pillars of low-key Web3 in my mind, at least. And really nice IPFS service, really good free, tier, 5 gigabytes, I think, for free account. And really responsive. Like, you don't find this in all IPFS services. Some are a little slower than others. Some, their bandwidth gets taken up and then they slow down when you need them or whatever. Web3 storage has been really good so far. And the plugin, I think, also pretty, has all the things you need, right? So in this case, We want to take a file that has just been returned by the image element to image plugin. And so we just call this action upload. So one thing you can do if you're ever going to add an action, you can do a quick search. I just did Web3, and here again, great. I think the Web3 storage plugin is really great because it has all these different options. I could launch a picker, like a file picker, so I can pick a file from my computer. I could point it to a file, right? I can upload multiple files. I can upload a folder. I can upload a file from the web if I supply a URL. So there's all these different options, which is really cool.
Yeah, right. That's really good.
Yeah. So again, it's a combination of things, but that's one of the big reasons why this one stands out to me. But yeah, we know the file, so we're just gonna reference it with a dynamic expression. Another really cool thing about Bubble is it knows context, right? So we kick this off or this leg of the logic by saying the element succeeded. And all of the things now that we place into that workflow, it knows the context, right? It knows that it's operating because the image was successfully captured. So we can do cool things like now reference that element directly, and also reference, if I clicked into here, I could do width and height, but basically the element is pretty simple, right? The image capture element is pretty simple. It basically just stores the URL of the image it just created. And what we're going to do here, this wrap and directory, you basically have two options for IPFS. You could have a hash go directly to a file, which is, sometimes works well. The formulas or the expressions that we have, it just kind of assumes that, it's actually presented more in a directory format. So you have a hash, which actually goes to a folder, and then you have to append the file name, which actually gets you to the image, which seems like an extra step, but it comes in handy because if you're ever going to pass that URL onto another application, those applications won't necessarily know how to understand just a strict hash, right? Right. You pass it a hash, it's going to be what the heck is this thing? I don't know what this is. But if you pass it a hash and a slash and then a file name, you give that to any app, any browser, it'll be oh, okay, this is an image. I'm just going to,
And that makes it, is it the word composable or interoperable?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's an element of it, right?
Or understandable even.
Understandable. Yeah, exactly. Or retrievable is another way I would think about it, right? So that's pretty much it. We've kicked off the second step of our logic. So now we've uploaded to Web3 storage. Same way we got this pairing, right? We got a pairing of an action. Now we have a response that we expect back, and that is actually this one. Another kind of thing that I do, little bit of a best practice, not necessity, but the color schemes for these blocks, there's no tried and true reason or whatever. I just use cyan because it just pops out to me, and if there's something that I'm actively working on, I'll typically color it cyan just so my eye knows where to go. I've actually given this feedback directly to Bubble, to their product managers or whatnot. They're like, do you have any feedback? I was like, yes. Please help us organize the workflow tab. It's like if you look at this, it's not even really alphabetical. I'm not actually sure what how they organize this stuff.
I would organize. Yeah, I've noticed that sometimes it pops up elsewhere. I'm like, so you've got to put them into folders, then, haven't you? So.
Totally. Yeah. They have this folder structure, but honestly, it's not that easy. Time
consuming.
What I suggested to them is just put something up here sort by usage, or sort by alphabetical, or descending, ascending, whatever, something like that. Or even better, give us a drag and drop thing where I can just start putting these in folders, and I just want to be able to expand and collapse folders, rather than have this thing on the side over here. Anyway, a little bit of a aside, but that feedback has been submitted. We'll see what happens. But anyway, so Web3 storage uploaded successfully. Very similar. Next leg of our logic, throw up another alert and say, hey, this thing succeeded. And now we want to mint, right? So the minting requires a couple of things, some of which we actually just talked about. So this is one instance where, again, we want to supply it an IPFS address for the image, because you can send it a straight URL like HTTPS like blah blah.com. Here's my image.png or whatever.
Yeah.
But this is more along the lines of like the Web3, philosophy, I guess, right? The whole Web3 philosophy is I want to build things in such a way that no other third party could mess around with it. And so that's why the precedent, again, the common practice is to use an IPFS URL. There's actually other ones. There's Arweave as well, which is similar, but same idea. Like I want it to be in a permanent file store, which isn't managed by any third party. So that's why we'll use image. That's why we use IPFS. Again, these other values, name and description, we're just pulling from the inputs. Supply, this is one actually you might want to go in and modify, Tim, which is I put a hard-coded value of 100, but that could be another input, and you could give the user the option. In this case, I left it this way because it's kind of your option as the app builder, where you want that, whether you want that to be predetermined, it's just set at the app level, or give the user the option or whatever. Like it's editable, right? So we want to mint to the user's wallet. So actually, this is something, if you go back to episode 2 that we touched on. So episode 2, we talked about the whole login process, Web3 auth, things like that. So we actually just kind of have that now as almost a given. The current user is logged in, actually because, Tim, of the workflows you set up, Web3 auth, they're logged in. They have a wallet. We're going to save that wallet address to the user's object, to their profile. And now we can retrieve it again. The current user's user wallet, because we do need a mint2 address. We need to tell the smart contract function, like, hey, we created this thing and this is who it goes to. There is another set of functions here that we do need to take into account, which is the collection, right? And so we're going to maybe step out a little bit of this mint workflow and just take a quick look at one of the test buttons we had here, basically. So we have a test button here, which is create collection. And anytime you mint something, you need to be able to tell it what contract it's minting from. Because at the end of the day, if you think about what an NFT is a token that's been generated by a smart contract on chain. Right? Right. And so to be able to create an NFT, you need firstly that contract to be deployed, or you can use an existing one, but you need one that is deployed and that user has the proper permissions for, so that they can actually mint to that contract. You can't just have, part of the beauty of blockchain is like you just can't willy-nilly start using other people's contract if they haven't permissioned you to be able to do so. So in this case, I set up this quick button because I got into the app and I was like, okay, we're going to start this minting thing. Oh, wait, but I don't have any collection I can mint to. So I am going to step into this workflow. So again, simple button. And the button itself, pretty straightforward. I am saving some values here. And the reason for this is because on the catch, on the response, I want to create a collection object. But I don't necessarily have, in this case, like, I kind of skipped a step a little bit here because, again, this is kind of your at your option, Tim, whether you want the collection, like if you want every user to have one collection, you could do that as part of the onboarding process. I've done that in other projects where they sign on, and as part of them entering in their name and stuff, you either do it explicitly or you do it in the background. A collection gets deployed for them, right? Yeah. And so again, your option, or you could make it more open-ended. They have an actual way to deploy as many as they want, and they can use them almost as like folders and stuff like that. Yeah. So
I'll tie it in initially under a contract of the platform as publish. That's what I'm planning to do.
Yeah.
However, as sort of like a Twitter premium, if you hold publish's dedicated NFT or token or something, then they'll have permission to create their own dedicated contract per profile page.
Yeah. Yeah.
which, both are going to be interoperable, and if they're ever booted or something, they can still take with them, composable,
Sure.
etc. But
yeah,
for the simplicity of things, is this way.
Right. Cool. No, I think that's a really cool concept. I can see that working as well. And like I said, anything they deploy, it's theirs. Like they have a real wallet.
Own it.
It's deployed from their wallet, and that wallet effectively owns that contract. So even outside of your app, they could access it, right? So so here we are, right? We're going to save some of these values that we're going to need. So typically a collection has a name, a description, a symbol. All of those are just text values. It's kind of arbitrary. They can really be anything. There is typically an external URL. This is metadata for the collection, but it's, in your case, we want to, let's say, point them back to Publish.place, right? So we have the website home URL. And we have a royalty percentage, which can be set at the collection level, but royalty actually can be set at the NFT level as well. But if you want like a default, you could set it here, and that the value here would be something like 10, right? It's in percentages. And then finally, you have if you do have the royalty, you want to be able to set the recipient of the royalty at the collection level. It should be the person who created the collection, typically, right? So we're saving all these values. We are then actually reusing those values right away. So rather than kind of punching in the user's wallet or this thing here. Actually, I'll talk about what this thing is in a second. But we're just starting to actually just reuse our variables, right? So it's again, common coding best practice is if you're going to use something more than once, try to build it once and use it multiple times. So this is one small example of that. So we're going to do that. And then actually, let's see, platform fee you could set here, but actually if we're eventually going to build a marketplace contract to go along with this, that's more typically where you would put the platform fee. And if you wanted, you could put an image. So we got a collection image. That's all well and good. So so this is what we use to generate or deploy the collection contract. I do want to come back to this floating group technical. So there's not much wizardry going on here, but again, this is a little bit of a best practice that I've developed over the years. It's kind of crazy, think about that. But over the years, I have I found myself constantly referencing the technical settings, especially if you have a minting page, but even in other instances, I want to reference it. And I just got tired. Originally, and again, this is me being a bubble newbie in large part, I would just have search for settings technical first item, like all over the place, like throughout the entire app. It was like search for settings, search for settings. And now in the age of workflow, right, units, that actually costs workflow units. Every time you do a search, right, there's actually more workflow units. But then secondly, again, it's prone to human error. Like what if I mess this up somehow? Like I, misreference something, or down the road, it's also a little brittle because if I wanted to go the route of making the app multi-chain, now I have to go back and change all these things because maybe it's not looking for the first item anymore. Maybe it's looking for the second item, or maybe it has a specific thing that it's looking for, right? For many reasons, this is very brittle. And so instead, what I did was I was like, okay, what I should do is I should have a constant thing that's pretty much on every page that is easily accessible, basically invisible because I don't need to actually visually interact with it. I just need to be able to reference it for logic. And so messed around with a couple of different versions of this. But if you create a floating group, which is floating around, like literally what it says, floating around on the page somewhere, I can make it really small, 1 by 1 pixel. So it's there, but more or less, unless you're sleuthing for it, you won't be able to find it. That's okay. And now I have the search for settings technical, but only in that one place, right? And this is really nice because now I can always reference the technical settings by referencing this floating group, and I can name it very explicitly. And if I ever need to change the logic for the technical settings, I can come back to it and on any given page, change it in one place and one place only. And then it would flow to every other instance that I'm referencing it. Right? So a little bit of an offshoot, but I think that's a valuable thing because I've ended up using this now for other configurations, other settings, objects. Even I have a floating group for plugins in a lot of cases, or if I'm just like using a lot of plugins on the page, I'll put them all in that floating group in the floating plugin group or whatever, and then it's all in one place, right? So that's what this is, right? Floating group, setting technical. It has a setting technical object in it or a parameter stored in it, and then the actual value that I'm trying to get to, right?
Okay.
So we deploy that collection. Again, pairing, right? You have the action, you have the response. So we have contract deployed. And this is where, again, we needed those values to be stored because, Third Web knows a contract was deployed, but it doesn't necessarily save all of the values of that contract, right, in the object, right? It basically, the thing that it does save is the new hash, the new transaction ID, which is certainly like valuable. It's something that we want to store. But all of the other things around the collection, like the name, description, symbol, all that stuff, you could look it up by using the transaction hash, but you just spend more time doing that. So this is why we saved it as the states, right? This is why we saved it in the dashboard page. So at this point in the workflow, we can just retrieve it again. So I don't need to go like hunting and pecking. Like, what was the name again? Or like, another thing that sometimes happens is like if you reference the input here, like if I just they were typing in the name of the collection, I could just reference the input. Yes, you could, but there have been some instances where I've been working in Bubble and maybe another function was running alongside it. Maybe a function had there's something that reset relevant inputs, right? It's just this like open-ended function call in Bubble where you're basically, if you want to blank out inputs, that's one thing you could use to like blank out and reset inputs. Maybe that function gets called somewhere along the line, and then you just open yourself up to these little weird things that might happen. I might call them race conditions in other contexts. So this is just a more reliable way to do it because it was stored. It was stored at that previous step, and so it's like kind of like what you get, right? You know what you're getting. And again, build once, use many times. So we have all these values. We have, actually, I just noticed something here. We got to fix this. So we, I had a technical setting object that I copied, and then I realized that was actually an older version. Because I had been making subsequent changes. So I deleted that one and replaced it again by copy pasting. And so we just need to point this one at the new one. That's a good catch. So we have all of these values now stored at the collection level. And we can set the slug. The way Bubble sets this up, there's actually a specific function called to set the slug, so we want to call that. And typically we'll set it by the collection's name. And then this is a pretty important step. At the dashboard, again, the page level, we want to save this collection as I like to call it selected collection. Because again, then we can use that value to mint, right? We need to tell the mint function what collection we're pointed at. If the user is logging in for the first time, then we do need another instance of this, let's say in the page is loaded function, right? Where it is basically, again, setting that selected collection. And in this case, pretty simple logic here. It's just basically saying, hey, first come, first serve, right? What's the first collection that comes up if I search for this user? And let's say base it on created date. So the most recent collection if there are multiple ones. But then this logic could be anything. It could be, again, in your instance, where down the road, maybe it's Publish Pro. And, there's different sorting mechanisms you can use. But this is where you would want to do that, right?
Yeah.
Or you let them manually select. You set a default, but then you give them the option to click, whichever other collection they want them into. That's certainly doable too.
Okay.
Yeah. So coming back to Oh, actually, yeah, minting function. There we go. So that's this. So we kind of double clicked into this dashboard. Now we know what this selected collection thing is. It's basically either the one we just deployed or the one that we've searched for when the page was loaded, and now we've stored it. And we're pulling the specific contract address out of that collection object, and that's what we're going to mint to, right? And again, pairing action and response. So we call this, and we want to get the other end of the equation. And now we're actually getting. We think about the stretch limo. we're coming to the back end of the stretch limo now. So we we had the front part, and we built two middle parts, and now the thing is actually minted. Now we're kind of get to the tail end and the tail lights or whatever. So the NFT was successfully minted. Throw up another alert just to be consistent. And now we want to start to actually build that NFT object. So we have a representation of the NFT. Yes, the NFT is on chain, but to do things in the app, we still need a local representation of that on-chain object. And this is what we're going to do here. So again, we copied and pasted the NFT object from the other app. That's what we're basically, that type of thing is what we're leveraging here. And yeah, there's a lot of values here. I'm not going to step through all of these, but you can kind of reference and pretty much make sense of a lot of these. I would say, some of these are not even really necessary. It's just when I was building this is more for completeness sake, like for instance, saving the hash of the image from IPFS and the hash of the metadata. Just nice to have if you need it. I don't often need it, but doesn't hurt to have it. The token ID is pretty critical. You definitely want to save that. Name, description, those are coming from the inputs. Again, maybe this is an example where we could have stored this as well, but just as a mental footnote, hey, if you ever have a weird situation where the name and description is blank, you might want to look at reset relevant inputs and whether that's blanking these out before you save them. You definitely want to save the collection because otherwise it's not going to know what it's associated with. Creator is a good one to use. These are more like metadata. Image, definitely want that. Category, I think this is actually missing an option set. I think category here, but in your case, the categories are going to be different. So in my case,
categories.
Yeah.
Category on this site is irrelevant. Like I said, the thing is with Publish or any DApp, it should be just a front facing, so on that platform. But to make it interoperable, you need to strip it down as basic as possible.
Right.
So the category shouldn't even be in there.
Yeah.
Just for the platform's sake, to what's the word? Library it style.
Yeah. And I think actually status is another one that could use an option set, but basically this becomes more relevant if and when you get more into the marketplace side of things. So status is typically not for sale, on sale, et cetera, et cetera. So could be relevant, could be not, depending on your use case. Same thing with price and things like that. So this one is pretty important. Item contract address. You could retrieve it by doing a couple steps, hey, here's the NFT. Okay, here's the collection for the NFT. Okay, here's the contract address for the collection. But just because this comes up a fair amount, it saves a little bit of the computer's computation to have the contract address stored directly in the NFT. So that's another thing that I actually changed more recently. Set the slug, same thing. Typical slug construction is contract address and token ID, which is what we're doing here. And we have a little bit of a delimiter between, which is the dash. And a couple saving. The rest are basically saving the value in different respects. So we want to save the NFT we just created and owns for the user. So I did actually, this is a good thing. I did actually add these values as lists of NFTs to the user object. So if we go to the existing user object, You'll see these, I think, down below. Here we go. Yeah, list of NFT, right? And also, I think I added user wallet too. I don't think you were storing that previously, but that is definitely a good one to have.
I think user wallet was coming up as it was in the email field with find and search at mail.com removal.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was capturing the numbers without the at mail.com. I think that was originally in the
was in there? Yeah,
V2
okay.
that you had, a V1, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, that's one of the very, very earliest parameters. Like, you need that for sure.
Yeah.
So, similarly, this is more just like blocking and tackling at this point. So we have that collection object. We want to add the NFT to that collection object. So again, in the database, it's representative of what's actually happening on chain. And then, the NFT side of it, this is more actually specific to your case, where for the NFT, we actually want it to point to the article that it is a representation of, right? So and then same thing with the article. We want the article to point to the NFTs. We want them pointing at each other. So if any case we start from one and want to find the other, it's like we don't have to go doing a search, right, and using up, bandwidth and computation to do that. It's just a direct link. And now we finally get back to the end of the limo. These are the original, steps that you had in your prior step, which is, okay, now we shift the dashboard back to the main view, scroll to top, and there we go. And while we're at it, maybe we just print another one. But yeah, man, that's like soup to nuts. That's pretty much. Actually, what I'll do is I'll post one more just for the fun of it, and then the last thing we'll do is step into that view NFT button. Pretty simple, but worth looking at. We just walked through the entire workflow. Hopefully helpful. And this is kind of cool. These pop up. You definitely want to use the publish thing again. Livestream 9.18.23, episode 4. 3. And here now. Click the button, and now we know what's happening with all these pop-ups over here. Image captured. Okay, that's IPFS successful. Sorry, no, that was element capture. Image was captured. Now IPFS is successful, and now we know it just kicked off the mint function, and it's on chain, so it might take a little bit. But once that goes through, then we'll have the mint. The successful mint function callback, and then hopefully it'll come back to the dashboard page. And in the meantime, what we can do is, there we go. On chain might have been a little bit backed up, but I went through. So here we go. We just walked through the entire workflow. So here we got another button we added here, and if we go to design, and I think, let me see, what is might have to remind myself here. View articles, there we go, very aptly named. View articles. So view articles, I want to view, I think it's hidden by default, those buttons, which makes sense. You only want them to be visible if the user themselves is looking at it. So there's the buttons. There's the view NFT button that we added. Here's the workflow. And there we go. Pretty simple. Open an external website, open in a new tab. But what we're simply doing here is we are basically constructing a URL, a link. What you might want to do, Tim, eventually is make this a little more dynamic. So like one thing I've done in the past is we have the settings technical object. And we have some of these external URL links. Actually, let's take a look at the live one here. So I think I might have cleared these out. Okay. Right, here we go. External base URL. I'm not using this right now. This one's pointing towards Rarible. But this you could use, and it'd be more of a dynamic expression. right?
Right.
Because you're going to want different base URLs for certainly for mainnet versus testnet, right? And if you set it up this way, that previous workflow we were looking at, which was changing the admin settings, you could have it. You could have it such that it takes now, let's say, from the option set. Where's the equivalent base URL? There it is, external base URL, right? Then you take the mainnet version of, let's say, OpenSea or whichever you want to use. You paste it in there, and then at the same time, the whole chain is getting swapped out. This base URL is also getting swapped out, and so you don't have to go in and have, again, something that's brittle like this right now as it's currently set up, where this is hard coded, right? You just have this more have another expression here, which is, again, now putting all the pieces together. You got the floating group, right? Settings technical. And let's see. Actually, you know what? Why don't we just try to do this? I'm going to copy this value. I am going to replace the this. So we got external base URL. Right, I'm going to save that. So we got that. I'm going to come back to this. And now starting to put the pieces together. Replace this with an expression. We got this floating group, settings technical.
Yeah.
We want to reference the object and then reference the base URL. There it is, external base URL. And I think this will still work, but what we typically want to do, let's see, contract address, token ID. So what we typically want to do is have this be one expression. Actually, just out of curiosity, I'm just going to see if this works or not. So again, these are kind of getting into the minutia here, but let's see. My page. Oh, yeah. Okay, hold on a second. There we go. Articles. There we go. Let's see if this works. So the latest one. Yeah, that worked. Okay. So again, I think OpenSea, its indexer is a little bit slow, but like we saw before, it's definitely an IPFS, the image. But that worked. The one thing that we might want to do here is make this one expression by basically doing append. So if I did this, let's see, and it's working, but the reason you want to do this is sometimes you may just get some weird behaviors if you're constructing the text, but you're putting it piecemeal. Like you have the front of the URL and then the back of the URL, but it's actually two different expressions. What you're basically doing is you're assuming that those two expressions will always get put together back to back, right?
Okay.
Rather, what you could do is explicitly set up the expression so it's constructed back to back. Like it is one actual text, like string, as opposed to two strings that you're hoping get put together the right way. So what we're going to do here is parent groups, articles, article NFT, contract. Again, this is what we referenced before, contract address. And I think that's it, actually. Right, for that part. So that's the contract address. We want to do another append. This one is a little bit unique to OpenSea in that they use the slash. Rarible will use a colon. We use a like it could be anything, but it's just the naming convention of the particular app that you're targeting. Append one more. Parent groups, articles, token ID. So now then, since we have that, we can clear this half of it. And what we should hopefully see, token ID, is more or less the same results. But like I said, these little things sometimes add up because you may find yourself down the road where it's like, yeah, and sometimes there's unexpected outcomes or unintended consequences. Like you may have a browser that just happens to look at those strings differently. I have had this instance in the past where
Safari.
What's that?
Safari.
Yeah, totally. The one weird browser. It always seems that there's always a browser issue. It always seems to be Safari for some reason. Yeah, right. But yeah, perfect example. So click this one more time. Oh, okay. So here's something. So I think what's happening here is this is actually a prior article that I published before I started populating the doing the cross referencing. So right. There we go. So this is a more recent one. Works the same way, but the actual back end of it is a little bit more foolproof, and less brittle. So, whew, man, yeah. So we did a full on walkthrough. Not quite the build from scratch, but I think all things relative. We had some really good conversation, I think, about other really cool concepts. So I think that was worth trading off for. And I think, with this walkthrough, we still got, hopefully, the full like context, right? Each of the steps, how to do each of the steps, why we're doing each of the steps, how to link the logical workflows together, how to modify them if you needed to, like, for instance, the collection deployment or number of editions, things like that. And then we actually walk through it again live to see that it's working, and the thing is now a low-key Web3 app officially. There's more things you can always do to it and different directions you can take it, but yeah, Tim, again, want to thank you for bringing this concept, one, bringing it to life, but two, bringing it to my attention so that I could kind of help and think about this interesting challenge of augmenting or extending a non-Web3 template to become a Web3 template. And hopefully others who have similar ideas can follow suit and maybe use this as a reference. But I don't know, was it helpful for you? Hopefully?
Of course. I'm going to go back over the stream and take a closer look at all the workflows and everything too, because there are things, as you know, I was traveling at the time, so I've not actually dived into it until after this, so I didn't want to touch or break anything until now, because I'm probably going. But I'll have a look at it now after this stream and go from there. And then if I've got any more questions, I'll just bounce them back over to you.
Awesome.
But yeah, thanks for showing me and having this discussion.
Awesome. So yeah, I'll mark up this. This is actually unintentionally a longer one, but again, I think really, really good conversation. I want to kind of mark all the topics we covered because I think there's some really cool stuff. And then, stay tuned. I think the Friendtech thing is pretty intriguing, so we'll keep people posted on that. Thanks to everybody who kind of joined. We had a couple people join here and there, and then Air Bear Club might be teed up for episode 5. We'll see. But awesome stuff. We'll consider this episode 4 in the books, man. I think this has been really great. Really fun walking through, and again, really fun, really cool concept that I had fun thinking about, trying to figure out how to kind of bolt on some Web3 stuff. But from here, man, I'm really, really excited, really curious to see what else you bring to it.
Excellent. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it,
man. All right. Thanks, everybody.
I'll catch up with you soon. Cheers, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye.